here.
I miss you too. I love coming here. Trying to talk to them about my menopause bill. Menopause, yes, I said it. Talking about menopause bill.
Come on, that's it. Can you get
great.
cooler?
Halle Berry is more than just a Hollywood actress. She is a symbol of breaking barriers, of becoming the first, and of rewriting history for Black women in cinema. With her Oscar-winning performance in Monsters Ball and her iconic roles in films like X-Men, Die Another Day, and Catwoman, she became one of the most recognizable stars of her generation. Her beauty, elegance, and undeniable talent placed her on the world stage as not only one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, but also as an emblem of progress in an industry that too often closed its doors to women of color. But behind the cameras, red carpets, and magazine covers lies a life story marked by heartbreak, loneliness, and an almost constant fight for respect. Halle Berry's rise to fame was paved with early trauma, broken relationships, and the painful weight of carrying representation on her shoulders. For every moment of triumph, there was an equally haunting chapter of tragedy. She was celebrated as a trailblazer, but also mocked, ridiculed, and at times discarded by the very system that claimed to honor her. The central question that haunts Halle Berry's story is this: how can a woman who broke barriers, who stood as a symbol of beauty and success, still be plagued by heartbreak, disappointment, and public humiliation? Her life reflects the painful duality of fame, that while the spotlight can crown you, it can also burn you. This documentary unravels the paradox of Halle Berry's life, her meteoric rise, her extraordinary achievements, her devastating personal struggles, and her ongoing journey to find peace. It is a story of light and shadow, triumph and heartbreak.
Early life in childhood, 4 minutes 136 to 6:11. Halle Maria Berry was born on August 14, 1966, in Cleveland, Ohio, into a world that would shape her with both pain and resilience. Her childhood was anything but easy, and it is here in the shadows of her earliest memories that we begin to understand the tragedy that would haunt her even as she ascended to the heights of Hollywood. Her mother, Judith Ann, was a white English immigrant who worked as a psychiatric nurse, and her father, Jerome Jesse Berry, was an African-American hospital attendant. Their relationship was turbulent, scarred by poverty, racial tension, and Jerome's violent temper. Halle was just 4 years old when her parents divorced, but the scars of her father's abuse remained etched in her memory. She witnessed him physically abuse her mother, and those images of domestic violence would resurface years later when she found herself in relationships marked by heartbreak and pain. Growing up biracial in a predominantly white neighborhood, Halle often felt the sting of racism. She was teased for her skin color, excluded from social groups, and constantly reminded that she didn't fully belong in either world. Yet she carried herself with dignity, leaning into the lessons her mother instilled: discipline, perseverance, and self-belief. Judith worked tirelessly to provide for Halle and her older sister, Heidi, raising them as a single mother and encouraging Halle to dream beyond the limitations placed before her. But even with her mother's unwavering support, Halle's youth was riddled with challenges. Poverty meant constant instability, moving from place to place, scraping by, and relying on sheer willpower to survive. Yet within these struggles, Halle discovered her gift, a natural ability to perform, to command attention, to transform hardship into expression. She became an overachiever, excelling academically and socially. At Bedford High School, she was a cheerleader, honor student, editor of the school newspaper, and even crowned prom queen. Despite the turmoil at home, she presented herself as confident and unstoppable, masking her pain behind a radiant smile. That duality, strength in public, sorrow in private, would follow her into adulthood and define much of her career and relationships. At 17, Halle began entering beauty pageants, not for vanity, but as a way to fund her education and create opportunities that her financial background could not provide. She quickly found success, winning titles like Miss Teen All-American in 1985 and Miss Ohio USA in 1986. She even became the first runner-up in the Miss USA pageant and eventually competed internationally in the Miss World 1986 competition, where she placed 6th. For the first time, the world saw her beauty, and for the first time, Halle tasted what it felt like to be celebrated. But even this success carried its own shadows. She was praised for her appearance, yet often underestimated for her intelligence and talent. Doors opened because of how she looked, but the deeper recognition she craved was still denied. As she transitioned from adolescence into adulthood, Halle's early life was a mixture of soaring ambition and deep emotional wounds. The trauma of witnessing abuse, the sting of racism, and the instability of poverty created in her a relentless drive to escape. She longed for a world where she could define herself, not by her circumstances, not by her appearance, and not by the tragedies of her past, but by her own strength and artistry. This resilience, forged in childhood, would push her toward Hollywood. Yet it also planted the seeds of her greatest heartbreaks. Because even as she rose to unimaginable heights, Halle would find herself haunted by the same patterns of pain she witnessed as a child. Broken relationships, public betrayals, and the constant search for belonging.
First steps. Struggles. When Halle Berry left Cleveland, she carried with her little more than determination, beauty, and the scars of her past. The dream was clear, to make it as an actress, but the path was littered with obstacles that would test her patience, self-worth, and very survival. Her first step into independence was a leap of faith. After her success in pageants, she decided to pursue modeling and acting full-time, moving first to Chicago and then to New York City. With almost no financial resources, she found herself on the harsh end of reality, sometimes living in homeless shelters, sometimes sleeping in run-down apartments where she had to ration food just to make it through the week. The glamour of pageant stages quickly faded into the cold loneliness of survival. Berry later revealed one of her lowest moments. During those early years, she spent a week living in a homeless shelter after her savings ran out. It was a brutal wake-up call, but instead of breaking her spirit, it reinforced a deep resilience. As she would recall, "I was forced to fend for myself, to find strength in the darkness." This theme, strength forged in suffering, would define her life's journey. In New York, she pursued acting classes, pounding the pavement, auditioning endlessly, and facing rejection after rejection. Casting directors often dismissed her, stereotyping her as too beautiful to be serious, or too black for roles that Hollywood still overwhelmingly reserved for white actresses. Others told her she wasn't black enough for roles specifically written for African American women. This double-edged sword of race and appearance became a lifelong burden, placing her in a constant battle to prove that her worth extended far beyond her physical beauty. Halle's first television break came in 1989 with the short-lived series Living Dolls, where she played a young model. It seemed like a step forward, but the show was canceled after just 12 episodes, leaving her unemployed once again. Not long after,
tragedy struck during another role. While filming for the series A Different World, she collapsed on set and was later diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. At just 22 years old, Halle was confronted with the harsh reality of living with a chronic illness that could, at any moment, threaten her career. She kept the diagnosis largely private, unwilling to let it define her publicly, but behind the scenes, it was another invisible struggle she carried. Still, her persistence paid off when she moved to Los Angeles. There, she landed her first significant film role in Spike Lee's Jungle Fever, 1991. Playing Vivian, a crack-addicted girlfriend, Halle shocked audiences by stripping away glamour to embody raw, painful reality. Many in Hollywood were stunned. This wasn't just another beauty queen turned actress. This was a woman willing to go to the darkest places of the human experience. That role became symbolic. Halle was not afraid to shatter expectations, even at the cost of her own comfort. From there, she began building her resume with films like Strictly Business, 1991, and Boomerang, 1992, opposite Eddie Murphy. Yet, despite steady work, she still found herself battling typecasting. Hollywood often offered her roles that emphasized her looks over her talent. Behind closed doors, casting executives doubted that a black actress could carry a film or become a global box office star. Halle's early career was a tug-of-war between visibility and limitation. She was seen, but never fully recognized. During this period, Halle's personal life was also marked by heartbreak. She entered into her first marriage with baseball player David Justice in 1993. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale romance, a rising actress and a professional athlete. But the marriage quickly soured, turning into a storm of arguments, mistrust, and emotional pain. When the relationship ended in 1997, Halle admitted she was so devastated that she even contemplated ending her life, driving her car into a closed garage with the engine running. She later said that what saved her was the memory of her mother, who had endured her father's abuse yet survived. Halle could not let that legacy of resilience end with her. These struggles, the poverty, the rejection, the health battles, and the personal heartbreak, did not crush Halle Berry. Instead, they built within her a fire that few in Hollywood could match. She had walked through loneliness, illness, and despair, and still, she kept moving forward. Every no only made her more determined to prove that she was not just another face in a magazine, but a true artist with something profound to give. By the mid-1990s, Halle was ready for the next chapter, not just surviving in Hollywood, but breaking through. What she didn't know then was that her breakthrough would catapult her into stardom, but also into a new set of burdens that fame would only magnify.
Breakthrough moment. For Halle Berry, the early 1990s were years of climbing uphill. Rejections, stereotypes, heartbreak, and illness. But it was also the period when the world began to see that behind the beauty queen was an actress with raw talent and fearless ambition. This was the decade where she broke through, shattering boundaries that had kept women like her on the margins of Hollywood. Her first defining moment came with Spike Lee's Jungle Fever, 1991, where she played Vivian, a drug-addicted woman lost to the streets. Halle deliberately stripped away all glamour for the role. No makeup, no pageant polish, no smiles for the camera. Instead, she immersed herself in pain, standing out in a film filled with powerhouse performances. Critics took notice. Here was a young actress unafraid to go to the darkest corners of human existence. That choice was symbolic. Halle was making it clear she would not be pigeonholed as the pretty face. She wanted to be taken seriously. In Boomerang, 1992, starring alongside Eddie Murphy, she played Angela, the grounded, artistic love interest who became the heart of the story. While many saw Murphy as the comedic draw, Halle's subtlety and warmth balanced the film, making her more than just another supporting role. This was when audiences began to see her as both relatable and aspirational, a star who could embody tenderness, intelligence, and resilience. Throughout the 90s, Halle strategically chose roles that demonstrated range. In The Flintstones, 1994, she played Sharon Stone, the glamorous secretary, embracing comedy while still holding her screen presence. But just a year later, in Losing Isaiah, 1995, she tackled a heart-wrenching drama about a mother fighting for custody of her child after overcoming drug addiction. This duality, comedy one moment, emotional depth the next, proved her versatility. Yet despite the growing body of work, she still faced Hollywood's invisible ceiling. While white actresses were being offered leading roles and multi-million-dollar contracts, Halle often had to fight for parts that allowed her to showcase her range. She was stuck between two worlds, too famous to be overlooked, yet still marginalized by an industry that refused to give black women the same opportunities. The mid-1990s also brought Halle's personal life into the public spotlight. Her marriage to David Justice ended bitterly, and the media was quick to paint her as unlucky in love. The scrutiny stung, but Halle refused to let it derail her career. Instead, she poured her pain into her craft. Her next career-defining role came in Bulworth, 1998, opposite Warren Beatty, where she played Nina, a politically aware activist. The film wasn't just a quirky political satire, it showcased Halle as an actress who could blend charm with gravitas. She was no longer just the pretty woman on the side. She was central to the message. Around the same time, she took on Introducing Dorothy Dandridge, 1999, an HBO biopic about the first black woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. This role was transformative. For Halle, playing Dorothy Dandridge was more than just a performance. It was a mirror. Dandridge had been celebrated for her beauty, yet punished by an industry unwilling to let her rise. She had been both adored and denied. Halle immersed herself so deeply in the role that she not only earned critical acclaim and awards, but she also felt she was living Dorothy's tragedy in her own skin. The film won her an Emmy and a Golden Globe, finally cementing her as more than a rising star. But it was the year 2000 that changed everything. Halle took on the role of Storm in X-Men, a character that gave her global visibility in a blockbuster franchise. Though the role didn't fully utilize her talents, it positioned her in front of millions worldwide. It was the Hollywood machine finally acknowledging her marketability. Yet Halle herself admitted that she wanted more than spectacle. She wanted something that would challenge her soul. That chance came in 2001 with Monsters Ball. Playing Letitia Musgrove, a broken woman grieving the loss of her son while navigating an impossible romance, Halle delivered a performance so raw, so devastating, that it shocked audiences and critics alike. The film was unflinching in its portrayal of grief, racism, and human fragility, and Halle stood at its center, stripped bare emotionally and physically. When she won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 2002, she became the first black woman in history to win that award. Her tearful speech, where she declared that this moment is for every nameless, faceless woman of color, remains one of the most iconic moments in Oscar history. For many, it was a triumph not just for Halle, but for generations of women denied the chance to be seen. Yet even in this breakthrough moment, tragedy lingered in the shadows. Hollywood celebrated her, but the roles that followed were inconsistent, sometimes even damaging. Her win, instead of opening endless doors, exposed the harsh truth. One Oscar couldn't dismantle decades of systemic exclusion. She would soon discover that the industry she had broken through would continue to resist her. Still, in that moment, Halle Berry stood on the mountaintop, a symbol of hope, resilience, and undeniable talent.
Her breakthrough had finally come, but the question lingered, at what cost would she have to fight to stay there?
Peak career and achievements, 1651 to 1923. Halle Berry's career reached its undeniable peak in the early 2000s, and for a brief shining moment, she stood as not just a Hollywood star, but as a cultural icon whose achievements carried the weight of history itself. She had become the face of triumph for countless women of color who had long been excluded from the Hollywood spotlight. Yet beneath the applause, the red carpets, and the glittering awards, there was also an undercurrent of heartbreak, a cruel reminder that success in Hollywood, particularly for a black woman, often comes with invisible chains. The world remembers that unforgettable night in March 2002 when Halle Berry stood on the stage of the Kodak Theater, clutching her Academy Award for Monsters Ball. She was the first black woman in history to win the Oscar for Best Actress. Her acceptance speech, drenched in tears and raw emotion, sent shockwaves through the industry. With trembling words, she dedicated her win to every nameless, faceless woman of color who had been denied the chance to be seen. It wasn't just her victory. It felt like history was finally bending, even if only for a moment, toward justice. But if Monsters Ball represented the mountaintop, what followed revealed the treacherous valleys of an industry unwilling to change as quickly as the moment demanded. One would expect that such a groundbreaking win would lead to an avalanche of rich, complex roles for Halle. Instead, the scripts that came her way often felt limited, stereotypical, or flat-out unworthy of her talent. While white counterparts who won Oscars were offered sprawling opportunities, Halle often found herself battling to prove her worth all over again. At the same time, she was swept into global fame with the X-Men franchise. As Storm, she portrayed one of Marvel's most beloved superheroes. The films were box office juggernauts, and for many young fans, seeing Halle embody a powerful, commanding black superhero was life-changing. Yet for Halle, the role came with mixed emotions. Though grateful for the exposure, she felt the character was underwritten, her storylines often sidelined in favor of male characters. Privately, she admitted that while Storm was iconic, the films never gave her the depth she craved as an actress. Then came Die Another Day, 2002, where she played Jinx Johnson, a bold new Bond girl. For a moment, it seemed as though Halle Berry was everywhere. Oscar winner, superhero, action star. She was Hollywood royalty, gracing magazine covers, commanding million-dollar paychecks, and redefining beauty standards across the globe. But the peak also carried risks. In 2004, Halle took on Catwoman, a film that seemed destined to cement her as an action star. Instead, it became one of the most notorious flops of the decade. Critics savaged it, audiences rejected it, and Halle herself would later accept a Razzie Award for Worst Actress, showing up in person, holding her Oscar in one hand and the Razzie in the other. She laughed at herself, but beneath the humor, there was a deeper wound. For an actress who had fought so hard to be taken seriously, Catwoman became a cruel symbol of Hollywood's fickleness. Still, Halle continued to push forward. In 2007, she starred in Things We Lost in the Fire, delivering a devastating performance as a grieving widow. Critics praised her work, though the film underperformed. It was a reminder that Halle's greatest gift was her ability to channel pain and resilience into characters that reflected her own struggles. During this era, she also became one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, commanding salaries that few women of color had ever achieved before. She broke barriers not only artistically, but also financially. Yet even as she reached these milestones, she faced constant scrutiny. Her looks, her relationships, her career choices were dissected mercilessly by tabloids. Success brought visibility, but visibility brought relentless invasion. Her peak years also coincided with personal turmoil. Relationships crumbled under the spotlight. Custody battles drained her emotionally, and the narrative around her began to shift. Instead of being celebrated for her historic achievements, the media increasingly focused on her failed romances, framing her as unlucky in love rather than resilient in the face of betrayal and heartbreak. And so her golden era became bittersweet. On one hand, Halle Berry had achieved the impossible. Oscar winner, action star, international symbol of beauty and strength. On the other, she was navigating a cruel reality that Hollywood still hadn't fully embraced women like her, and the higher she climbed, the lonelier it sometimes felt at the top. What makes Halle's peak career so heartbreaking is not just what she achieved, but what could have been. She proved time and again that she was capable of extraordinary performances, yet the industry too often failed to meet her halfway. Her peak was dazzling, but also laced with the quiet tragedy of missed opportunities, systemic barriers, and the emotional toll of carrying history on her shoulders. Still, Halle Berry's golden years remain unforgettable. She redefined what was possible for women of color in Hollywood. She became a symbol of strength, beauty, and resilience. And even when the world tried to laugh at her missteps, she owned them, reminding everyone that vulnerability can coexist with greatness.
Personal life and challenges. If Halle Berry's professional career was defined by dazzling highs and devastating lows, then her personal life was a mirror of the same. Only the spotlight made every misstep more public, every heartbreak more painful, and every challenge more relentless. Behind the red carpet smiles and iconic magazine covers was a woman grappling with profound loneliness, broken trust, and a constant struggle to find stability in love and family. Halle's romantic life became one of Hollywood's favorite obsessions. Her first high-profile relationship was with baseball star David Justice, whom she married in 1993. At the time, they were celebrated as one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples, a picture-perfect pairing of athletic greatness and cinematic beauty. But what unfolded was far from perfect. By 1996, the marriage had collapsed amid rumors of infidelity and bitter arguments. The divorce hit Halle hard, so deeply that she admitted in interviews she had considered taking her own life during that time. It was a chilling reminder that even those who appear untouchable can be broken inside. Not long after, Halle married Eric Benet in 2001. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale romance. Two artists deeply in love, united in passion and creativity. But just a few years later, the marriage disintegrated when Benet admitted to struggling with sex addiction. For Halle, the betrayal was devastating. She had fought for love, believed in second chances, only to have her trust shattered once again. The divorce finalized in 2005, and once again, the tabloids feasted on her pain, turning her heartbreak into entertainment for the masses. In 2005, Halle found love again, this time with Canadian model Gabrielle Aubry. Together, they had a daughter, Nala, born in 2008. Becoming a mother was transformative for Halle. She often spoke of how motherhood grounded her, gave her a sense of purpose beyond the often cutthroat world of Hollywood. Yet even this blessing was not without turbulence. After their breakup in 2010, Halle and Aubry engaged in one of the most public and bitter custody battles in recent Hollywood history. The court cases dragged on for years, with accusations, counter-accusations, and ugly media coverage painting both parents in unflattering light. At one point, Aubry even physically fought Halle's next partner, actor Olivier Martinez, outside her home. The tabloids splashed the photos everywhere, turning her private pain into global spectacle. Halle married Olivier Martinez in 2013, and they welcomed a son, Maceo, later that year. But once again, happiness proved fleeting. By 2016, the marriage had ended, and Halle was left to navigate yet another divorce. With each failed relationship, the narrative hardened. Halle Berry can't keep a man. It was an unfair and cruel simplification of a deeply human struggle, reducing her resilience to a punchline. Beyond relationships, Halle also battled personal challenges with health. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the height of her early fame, collapsing on set one day in the 1980s. Managing her health in the glare of the spotlight became a lifelong challenge, forcing her to change her diet, lifestyle, and mindset while juggling the intense demands of Hollywood. Few fans knew the depth of her struggle, but behind the scenes, the illness was a constant reminder of her own fragility. Adding to this, Halle was a survivor of domestic violence from a past boyfriend in her 20s. In one particularly harrowing incident, she was struck so violently that she lost 80% of the hearing in one ear, a permanent scar on her body and soul. Though she rarely spoke of it in detail, she often used her platform later to advocate for domestic violence survivors, turning her pain into a mission to help others. Still, the trauma lingered. As the years went on, the cruel nature of celebrity culture intensified her struggles. Paparazzi followed her relentlessly, snapping photos of her children despite her desperate pleas for privacy. She even testified in front of the California State Assembly in 2013, supporting a bill to limit invasive paparazzi harassment of celebrity children. Her fight was not just for herself, but for every parent whose children deserve dignity away from flashing cameras. What makes Halle Berry's personal life so heartbreaking is not simply the string of failed romances or public custody battles, but the emotional toll it took on her spirit. Time and again she sought love, stability, and partnership, only to be met with betrayal, disillusionment, or conflict. And through it all, the world watched, judged, and dissected her pain, rarely granting her the humanity to stumble, to heal, and to rebuild in private. Yet even in her darkest moments, Halle displayed resilience. She turned her experiences into advocacy, speaking out for women facing domestic abuse, fighting for children's rights, and embracing single motherhood with pride. Still, the question remains: how does a woman who gave the world so much, her beauty, her talent, her vulnerability, find herself repeatedly at war with her own heart and the very world that once celebrated her? Behind the smiles, behind the iconic roles, behind the history-making Oscar, Halle Berry was, like so many others, just a human being longing for love, stability, and peace. Her challenges made her story deeply human, but they also added layers of tragedy to a life already burdened by the expectations of being the first.
Later years decline, 3356 to 3604. As Halle Berry entered her late 40s and 50s, the harsh realities of Hollywood became impossible to ignore. For an actress who had once been the face of a new era, Oscar-winning, bankable, beloved, her later years revealed the brutal truth of an industry that still punished women for aging, particularly women of color. What should have been the natural evolution of her career into veteran stardom was instead marked by dwindling opportunities, fading roles, and the painful sting of being undervalued. After her historic Oscar win in 2002, Halle had believed that doors would open for her and for other women of color. Instead, she watched with dismay as the industry quickly reverted to its old ways. By the late 2000s and 2010s, the roles offered to her were fewer and often uninspired. Hollywood had no roadmap for what to do with a black woman over 40, even one of Halle Berry's caliber. Where contemporaries like Nicole Kidman or Sandra Bullock were still given meaty leading roles, Halle often found herself sidelined or absent from the conversation entirely. The cruelest irony was that she was not forgotten. Her name was still legendary, her face still recognizable, but the industry seemed unwilling to grant her the second act she deserved. This lack of opportunity was more than professional frustration, it was deeply personal.
After years of carrying the weight of being the first and symbolizing progress for countless others, she was left to question, had her Oscar win truly changed anything at all? Her struggles weren't just external. The wounds of her personal life bled into this era. The aftermath of custody battles, the stigma of failed marriages, and the relentless narrative that she was unlucky in love clung to her like shadows she couldn't escape. The tabloids had shifted from celebrating her beauty to questioning her choices, her aging appearance, and her relevance. For a woman who had been exalted as one of the most beautiful in the world, the shift in media tone was especially cruel. Despite these challenges, Halle refused to fade quietly. She took creative risks, moving behind the camera. In 2020, she made her directorial debut with Bruised, a gritty MMA drama in which she also starred. The film was a passion project, years in the making, that showcased her resilience, grit, and refusal to give up. Critics praised her commitment, and audiences admired her physical transformation for the role. But even here, the triumph was bittersweet. Instead of being hailed as a new chapter in her career, the film was met with muted recognition. Once again, Halle had given everything, only to be met with lukewarm applause from the very industry she had once electrified. As she aged, she also spoke candidly about Hollywood's obsession with youth. In interviews, Halle revealed how producers and studios were reluctant to cast women her age in leading romantic or action roles. Men get better with age, but women are expected to disappear. Her words carried the weight of lived experience. Even after breaking barriers, after proving herself time and again, she was still confronted with a system that sought to erase her. Her later years also carried the quiet tragedies of invisibility. She was still present, still working, still beautiful, still relevant, but no longer at the center of Hollywood's universe. Where once she had walked red carpets as the pinnacle of glamour, she now appeared less frequently, her projects more modest, her name less often in bold headlines. The absence was noticeable. For fans who had grown up with Halle Berry as the embodiment of strength and beauty, the silence of the industry was heartbreaking. And yet, even in this decline, Halle refused to surrender her dignity. She leaned into motherhood, often speaking about how her children gave her perspective and grounding. She embraced aging with grace, rejecting Hollywood's pressure to remain eternally youthful. She admitted her flaws, laughed at her mistakes, and found ways to continue telling stories, even if the spotlight had dimmed. The decline of Halle Berry's career is not the story of a star who burned out, but rather the story of a star who was deliberately dimmed by an industry that has always struggled to sustain women once their youth fades. It is a tragedy not because she lost her talent or her will, but because the very system she broke into could not, or would not, fully embrace her evolution. Halle's later years are marked by resilience, yes, but also by a lingering sense of injustice. The woman who once stood on the Oscar stage as a symbol of progress now finds herself questioning whether the promise of that night was ever real. She remains a legend, but her career also stands as a sobering reminder. In Hollywood, even history makers can be forgotten too soon. Legacy and symbolism. When the story of Halle Berry is told, it is not just the narrative of a single actress. It is a mirror reflecting Hollywood's triumphs and its failures, a cautionary tale wrapped in glamour, resilience, and heartbreak. Her legacy is both luminous and painfully complex. She is the woman who shattered ceilings, yet also the woman whose struggles reveal how fragile those breakthroughs can be. In 2002, when Halle Berry stood on the stage of the Academy Awards clutching her Oscar for Monsters Ball, she declared that the moment was bigger than her. She dedicated her victory to every nameless, faceless woman of color who had come before her and who would come after. For a brief moment, her win was seen as the dawn of a new era.
Hollywood had finally acknowledged that black women could not only lead a film, but could also be honored at the highest level. She became a symbol of possibility, of progress, of overdue recognition. And yet, that very speech became the seed of tragedy in her legacy. More than 20 decades later, Halle Berry remains the only black woman to have won the Best Actress Oscar. No one has followed in her footsteps, and the promise of change her victory symbolized has not been realized. Her legacy, therefore, is bittersweet. She is a trailblazer, yes, but one who still stands largely alone, a solitary figure on a stage that should have been crowded by now. The burden of being the first has become entwined with the heartbreak of being the only. Her career after that historic night also feeds into this legacy. For many, Halle Berry embodies the paradox of Hollywood's treatment of black women. She was simultaneously celebrated and neglected, revered and rejected. She reached the very top, yet was denied the consistency of roles that her white peers enjoyed. Her post-Oscar career became a case study in the system's failure, an example often cited in discussions of diversity in film. Scholars, critics, and activists use her story to show how representation is not enough without structural change. But Halle's legacy is not defined solely by Hollywood's limitations. She has also become a symbol of resilience in the face of relentless personal and public battles. Her openness about surviving abuse, about her struggles in relationships, about her vulnerabilities as a mother has made her deeply human in the eyes of fans. Unlike many stars who carefully maintain an untouchable image, Halle has allowed the world to see her flaws. That honesty, raw, unfiltered, sometimes painful, has become part of her power. For countless women who see themselves in her story, she is not just a glamorous actress, but a survivor. Someone who proves that brokenness does not erase worth. In recent years, her embrace of aging has further cemented her symbolic role. In a culture that idolizes eternal youth, especially for women, Halle has chosen another path. She speaks openly about the beauty of growing older, about rejecting Hollywood's obsession with perfection, about finding confidence in authenticity. She has become an icon not just of beauty, but of self-acceptance, a symbol that women can be strong, sexy, and significant at any age. This evolution is powerful, but it also underscores the tragedy that Hollywood has not fully embraced this message. While Halle pushes forward, the industry still lags behind. Culturally, her impact is undeniable. She paved the way for actresses like Viola Davis, Lupita Nyong'o, and Zendaya. Even if the path remains riddled with obstacles, every woman of color who steps onto a red carpet or headlines a major film owes some debt to Halle Berry's breakthrough. Even in her struggles, she has opened doors, raised questions, and forced uncomfortable conversations. And yet, the tragedy of her legacy lies in its incompleteness. Halle Berry should have been one of the greats, not just a moment, but a movement. She should have had a career overflowing with roles that matched her talent, a filmography rivaling Meryl Streep or Cate Blanchett. Instead, she has a scattering of brilliance surrounded by long silences, a career that feels more like a promise unfulfilled than a dream realized. Her story in the end symbolizes the paradox of progress, how one woman can break through barriers yet still be confined by the walls that remain. Halle Berry will forever be remembered as the first black woman to win the Best Actress Oscar. That fact alone secures her place in history. But her legacy is also a haunting reminder of how much work still needs to be done, how fragile representation can be, and how lonely it is to stand on a stage built for many when you are still the only one. Halle Berry's legacy is not simply about what she achieved, but about what she was denied. She represents both victory and heartbreak, progress and limitation, triumph and tragedy. And perhaps that duality is what makes her story endure, not as a neat fairy tale, but as a raw and complicated truth about Hollywood, about womanhood, and about the cost of being first.
Wealth, assets, and lifestyle. When we think of Hollywood icons, we often imagine a life of unshakable luxury. Mansions overlooking the ocean, fleets of cars, closets filled with designer gowns, and an endless stream of glamorous parties. Halle Berry's life certainly carries some of these hallmarks of wealth. With a net worth estimated around $90 million, she has achieved the kind of financial success that places her among the most bankable actresses of her generation. Yet, as with everything in her story, the reality is layered with complexity. Triumph shadowed by pain, privilege burdened by struggle. Berry's financial rise mirrored her cinematic stardom. In the early 2000s, after Monsters Ball and the X-Men series, she was commanding salaries of $10 to $14 million per film, making her one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood. At the time, she was among a very small group of women, especially women of color, who could open a film based on their name alone. This placed her in a category that was both rare and groundbreaking. With this money, she invested in luxury properties, sprawling estates in Los Angeles, a beachfront home in Malibu, and a villa tucked away in the Hollywood Hills. These homes weren't just status symbols. They were attempts to carve out sanctuaries of peace, places where she could retreat from the constant chaos of her public life. Her taste has always reflected an understated elegance. Unlike many stars who flaunt excess, Berry's lifestyle leaned toward the refined. She was known for preferring art-filled living spaces, natural light, and designs that embraced both modernity and warmth. Fashion-wise, she became synonymous with daring red carpet looks, perhaps most famously her 2002 Oscar gown, a sheer Elie Saab creation that remains one of the most iconic dresses in Academy history. Off the red carpet, however, she preferred simplicity, jeans, tank tops, and minimal makeup. This contrast between her glamorous public persona and her grounded private style highlighted the duality that runs through her entire life. But wealth also brought burdens. Despite her financial independence, Berry's relationships created financial strains that mirrored her emotional heartbreaks. After her divorce from baseball player David Justice and later from R&B singer Eric Benet, Berry faced costly legal battles. The most public of these came after her breakup with Canadian model Gabrielle Aubry, with whom she shares custody of her daughter, Nala. Court documents revealed that Berry was required to pay Aubry $16,000 a month in child support, along with school tuition, health insurance, and other expenses. For many fans, this was a shocking revelation. How could a woman of her stature and success end up in such a financially draining situation? The answer, of course, lies in the legal complexities of custody agreements. But it also underscored the tragic irony of Berry's life. Even with fame, fortune, and accolades, she was not immune to being pulled into painful, costly conflicts that drained not only her finances, but her spirit. Berry herself has spoken candidly about this injustice, expressing frustration at a system she felt punished her for being a successful woman. These court battles became tabloid fodder, splashing her private struggles across headlines in ways that chipped away at the image of effortless success. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, a golden figure of Hollywood perfection, was shown as vulnerable, fighting not only for her peace of mind, but for the right to define her motherhood and her finances on her own terms. And yet, despite these hardships, Berry continues to maintain her wealth with shrewdness and adaptability. She has expanded her income sources beyond acting, venturing into producing, directing, and endorsements. She has been the face of Revlon for over 2 decades, a deal that has brought her tens of millions of dollars and cemented her image as both glamorous and relatable. More recently, she has embraced health and wellness entrepreneurship, launching fitness programs and beauty products that align with her personal lifestyle. Her lifestyle, however, is not purely defined by wealth. For Berry, luxury often intersects with wellness. She is known for her disciplined fitness routines, her passion for yoga, and her embrace of clean eating. She has also been open about living with type 1 diabetes, which has shaped her approach to health and diet.
Instead of being merely indulgent, her lifestyle choices often reflect survival and self-preservation. Her homes, her routines, her investments, these are not only symbols of affluence, but shields against the instability of her personal life. Still, the heartbreak of Halle Berry's wealth and lifestyle lies in the tension between the image and the reality. On the outside, she appears to embody the Hollywood dream: wealth, beauty, global fame. On the inside, her wealth has not shielded her from betrayal, heartbreak, custody battles, and loneliness. In fact, at times, her wealth became the very weapon used against her, making her a target in relationships and legal disputes, turning her success into a vulnerability. Today, at 59, Berry's lifestyle reflects a balance between glamour and groundedness. She still graces red carpets in breathtaking gowns, still lives in beautiful homes, still enjoys the fruits of her decades-long career. But she also spends quiet days with her children, tends to her health, and finds joy in simplicity. Her wealth has bought her comfort, but not immunity. Her lifestyle is enviable, yes, but it is also a reminder that luxury cannot mend a broken heart, cannot guarantee stability, and cannot protect one from the relentless pressures of fame. In the end, Halle Berry's wealth and lifestyle symbolize the very duality of her story: dazzling success intertwined with private pain. She has achieved everything the world told her she was impossible for a black woman in Hollywood: fame, fortune, awards, influence. Yet behind the walls of her mansions, behind the glamour of her gowns, behind the glitter of her bank account, lies the same human longing for love, peace, and fulfillment that no amount of money can buy.
Closing statement. End. Final reflection. As the screen fades from images of Halle Berry's red carpet triumphs to quieter glimpses of her private world, a mother walking hand in hand with her children, a woman training fiercely in a gym, a solitary figure gazing across the ocean, we are left with a question: what does it truly mean to be successful? Halle Berry's life is one of the greatest paradoxes in Hollywood history. She is the first and only black woman to win the Academy Award for Best Actress, a groundbreaking triumph that changed the face of the film industry forever. She became a global superstar through blockbusters like X-Men, a beauty icon through decades-long endorsement deals, and a cultural force who broke barriers and redefined what leading ladies could look like. To the world, she appeared unstoppable, an untouchable goddess of cinema. And yet, beneath the shimmering surface, her story was riddled with shadows. The tragedies she endured were not always the kind that make headlines with explosive scandal. They were quieter, more human, and in some ways, even more devastating. Childhood abandonment, abusive relationships, betrayals of trust, public heartbreaks, custody battles, and financial injustices. These were the bruises beneath the glamour. For every Oscar she held high, there was a night spent alone healing wounds the public would never fully see. For every iconic photograph of her smiling under blinding camera flashes, there were tears shed in silence away from the lenses. And this is perhaps the most heartbreaking truth. Success does not erase pain. Beauty does not protect from betrayal. Wealth does not guarantee peace. In Halle Berry's story, we see the cost of being a trailblazer, the weight of being the first, the relentless scrutiny of being a woman in an industry that exalts youth and punishes vulnerability. She shattered ceilings, but in doing so, she bore scars that others could not see. Yet tragedy alone does not define her. Even in the depths of her struggles, Halle Berry has remained a figure of resilience. She continues to work, to reinvent herself, to fight for roles in a system that has often underestimated her.
She continues to raise her children with fierce love, determined to give them the stability she herself was not denied. She continues to speak candidly about her struggles, not to seek sympathy, but to remind others that even the most celebrated among us are still human. In the end, Halle Berry's story is not just a Hollywood biography. It is a mirror held up to all of us. It reminds us that the people we idolize are not made of stone, but of flesh and blood, heart and soul. It reminds us that tragedy can coexist with triumph, that loneliness can walk hand in hand with love, that beauty can mask deep wounds. It reminds us that even legends can break, and that breaking does not make them less, it makes them profoundly human. So when we remember Halle Berry, not just as Storm in X-Men or as the Oscar-winning star of Monsters Ball, but as the woman behind the legend, we must hold both truths at once, the dazzling brilliance and the quiet heartbreak. Because her legacy is not only in the films she made or the awards she won, but in the story she lived, a story that proves that even the brightest stars cast shadows. And perhaps that is Halle Berry's final gift to us. Not perfection, not an illusion of a flawless life, but honesty. The reminder that every human being, no matter how iconic, longs for love, peace, and healing. And that even when life shatters us, we can still rise, still shine, and still find meaning in the broken pieces. As the final scene fades and her image dissolves into darkness, one line lingers, whispered not as an answer, but as a haunting reflection. Halle Berry's story is not just about how far one can rise, but how deeply one can endure.